guess today my esteemed colleagues and I, we're here to talk all about the business of retail media. I might throw to the team to introduce themselves, John, Harvey, Rog and Martin. I'm sure you all may know our esteemed colleagues, but John, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Great to be here. My name's John Harvey. I lead retail media for JPAC at Microsoft.
Hey everyone, it's Roger here from Diageo, and I look after retail media globally.
Martin Raab, so GM of Retail Media for Endeavour Group, which is Dan Murphy's, BWS and LH Hotels and Pinnacle Brands.
Thank you. And for those who don't know me, my name is Renee Usher. I'm the Director of Sales at Rio. And I guess today we're going to dive in and have a chat about all things of our evolving relationships in retail media. We see how rapidly that's growing. New entrants emerging into the industry and quite quickly, and then sizing up the prize of retail media. I guess as it's evolving really quickly and rapidly, some of the dynamics in relationships are really changing. And I'm really interested, Martin, from a retailer perspective as well, how retailers are really leaning into brands and vice versa, how are you seeing brands show up and working together for success for brands and retailers in this emerging state?
Thank you. Good question. We've heard that a few times. I might just touch on a bit around the org structures and how there's been a transition of way suppliers and brands are working with the retail. So when you look at a retailer, what you're seeing with retail media setups is either sits within the what we call the commercial team or the trading team. So that's for Endeavour. So I report to the director who has effectively the commercial, the buying relationship with our partners and our suppliers. So it's a very direct tie-in with the objectives of the business. Other businesses you'll see alignment with within the marketing teams, which obviously makes sense to align with the marketing outcomes as well. From what we are seeing from a supplier perspective is, 2 to 3 years ago you saw someone having a crack at retail media. Now with the larger players, you're having dedicated teams, dedicated skills in their agency partners being clearly dedicated to retail media. I've said about 5 times, which is a big shift, which means they're planning budgets, they're looking more long-term and more forward in the way they're planning. And then now what we're seeing how we work together is a move to what I call, from the shelf out in regards to planning or inside out planning. So, when you've got those close business relationships, you're thinking about how that customer journey works, I guess, from the shelf out. So, for example, if you're doing an Australian Open activation or something else, you'll spend all this money on sponsorship. You'll buy out of home, you'll buy this great TV, you'll do all these great activations on ground, and you want to make sure that those brands come to life when people are searching online, buying the product or go in store. So it's really critical that those things align. And also what happens now is you can use retail media measurement as a proxy to understand how, for example, that investment has worked to drive a brand outcome. And just touching a bit on measurement, it's not just about the sales outcome, but was that sponsorship there to bring in younger demographics or lift the brand insights and those types of things?
I completely agree. And speaking of Australian Open and some brands that like to bring those to life in meaningful ways with their retailers, I guess what I'm seeing in the industry is how not only the org structure is changing, but the talent that brands are looking to bring into their business to align really closely with retailers. And Rog, I guess I'd like to ask you from a Diageo's perspective, how are you seeing that change?
In terms of the relationships? Or
in terms of the relationships and how you're bringing maybe some of the brands to life with retailers in stores to drive meaningful impact and outcomes.
Well, there's a great example from the UK actually, talking about the Oz Open sponsorship. Guinness over there is now the #1 beer, which is great, but it gives us the scale to invest in things like the English Premiership sponsorship over there. So that's a good sponsorship in its own right, but it's then available on Amazon's Prime Video platform. So we can then enhance that by introducing our own first-party data, targeting that, enhancing that with Amazon shopper data, and really wrapping up that sponsorship in some really effective ways to then drive sales off the back of it. So obviously the primary goal there is awareness and reach for the sponsorship, but it can really turn into a good sales driving activity too. So that's a really nice example. Another good one from Germany is One I really love is working with Flink. So they're a quick commerce player, similar to Uber. And in that market, we've been able to get Bailey's into the ice cream aisle on this quick commerce player. So as an ice cream topping suggestion. And that's great just because it's a whole new section that people are searching in. Searches for ice cream happen to be a lot higher than cream liqueur on the platform. So it's a great traffic driver as well. And obviously just a new moment, a new occasion for that product. So another good one. And then, one other, I guess, from Ireland is we've got Dunnes Stores, which are a chain of stores over there. Obviously, they have a great name. But on that one, it's quite a simple execution. But on the site, we've got cocktails, mocktails, and ready-to-drink sections. So it's like a little owned space within their store. And we can obviously support that with retail media, drive traffic there. And obviously, it's driving that consideration and the ability to actually put products into your cart with easy-to-add lists and instructions and everything. So really nice execution that works well for that retailer as well.
Who doesn't love a little bit of a cross shop and ice cream and Bailey's?
Exactly.
With that in mind, who are you working with to bring those campaigns to life? Who are you pulling into the room from a brand perspective and a retailer perspective? And are you bringing agencies on the journey?
Yeah, we definitely have some great agency partnerships, and we're aligned with Omnicom globally, so we work with Flywheel as a specialist within that organisation. But then on our side, definitely different stakeholders. So we've got the trade and commercial teams that have the relationship getting the products into the retailers in the first place, and they'll also negotiate promotions and some retail media elements to drive those. We've got our commerce teams, which I work really closely with, who have that relationship with the retailers and the channels. They're looking at things like the digital shelf and optimizing that. And they're also working around key retail events, for example. So their priority will be like Prime Day or Black Friday, and really working with that partner outside of retail media, but on really maximizing it and having a huge success. And that's where we complement them with the media teams.
Amazing. And John Harvey, I'm really interested. Are there any lessons we can learn from other markets that we could consider here from an Australian perspective?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that when our business sort of looks at our global business and the difference between the regions, there are very key differences that drive our approach. I think one is consumer behavior. In North America, online sales are massive, whereas Australia tends to be very much a purchase in-store sort of market, which then changes the sort of solutions and balances kind of what different tech players can kind of bring to retailers and their programs. I think for us, one thing we've seen is out of the gates, I think we made a bit of a mistake trying to be that end-all be-all partner. And I think up to a few years ago in Australia, a lot of retailers were looking for that kind of single pane of glass. I think it was Andy that mentioned the omnichannel piece, which is incredibly difficult to manage. I think you're asking a lot of different tech players, depending on which channel you support, to come together. You're asking retailers who are kind of entering the space and maybe pretty new to it to understand how all those tech players connect to each other, how to unify reporting and measurement. And it doesn't necessarily allow for, I think, a really broader understanding and awareness of other solutions out there that could add value. And so I think over the last few years in markets like North America, we've seen a big shift from a lot of retailers looking for that kind of single do-everything partner to working with multiple partners and understanding how do we build expertise in our business across these different channels we have, and then more importantly, how do we do better at connecting them. I think a big challenge that North America saw was when new solutions came to market that a lot of retailers or brands could benefit from, there really wasn't a strong testing methodology or evaluation methodology outside of a massive RFP that retailers could employ. And so I think one of the shifts we've seen is retailers getting a lot better about working with multiple partners. I think some of the bigger retailer relationships we've had in the US went from 1 to 2 partners to now working probably with 7 or 8. I think off-network partners have really grown. I think with the programmatic tech companies kind of leaning into the space, we're seeing a lot more interesting demand opportunities that fall outside of just direct supplier demand. So I think those are some things and trends I think will start to come in Australia if they're not already here, which is how do we enable a sort of multi-partner strategy? How do we get out of this sort of process where we're waiting to get everything we need before we make a decision? I think there's A lot of companies doing evaluation sort of in parallel. Can we run an on-site evaluation in parallel to an off-network evaluation? So I think those are some of the bigger shifts we've seen, is going from that kind of single partner ecosystem to really planning and preparing for a multi-partner ecosystem.
You touch on a really nice point there, dealing with 7 to 8 partners from 1 to 2. In an emerging landscape, how do we best navigate and for that change, and how do we best work with multiple players as we grow as an industry?
Well, first and foremost, I think given the state of our industry, there is a lot of talent out there. I think that can help. I think what I've seen is, one of the things we used to hear a lot from our North American partners and European partners quite a bit was, nobody has retailer experience. You don't get this sort of retailer experience. But then you go to the other side, companies like programmatic tech companies, and there's a lot of experience within programmatic that could benefit the retailer space. And there's a lot of retail experience that could benefit the programmatic space. So I think, one, if we can work to sort of expand the talent pools that all of the entities are hiring against, because there are lots of available talent in the market, I think that's a good step into beefing up the sort of in-house expertise you have. Outside of that, I do think that the tech companies can do it, particularly the new ones entering the market, and as that number grows, can do a better job of maybe simplifying what we bring to market. I think a big mistake we as Microsoft made was we sort of repurposed our programmatic pitch to retailers, and it was way over a lot of people's heads. And we didn't really understand where this fit into all of the other partners that a retailer might have to work with. How do we work with each of these partners? How does our reporting line up? So I think we learned an important lesson in how do we do more research and prep work on our end to understand how we work alongside other competitors or partners that a retailer might employ, so that we can then work back with the retailer to help them sort of sift through that noise. And so, yeah, I think between the two is sort of the exchange of talent, hopefully, and the simplification of how a new partner fits into a broader ecosystem, or two really important steps.
And with that point, I'm really interested, Martin, in how a retailer is simplifying the ecosystem and how brands can work with you in, I guess, a less frictionless way as more players enter the market.
Thanks. There's probably 2 parts. I guess from the retailer perspective, we are obviously investing in platforms that brands can directly buy, or through the agencies scale complex investment online, etc. So that's the obvious side of things, and it's a necessity as you're going to have more players in the market. So there needs to be more, I guess, automation of buying, or the ability to target audiences, etc. And we're all working through that. The second part that's kind of happening as well, which is an indirect impact of more players in the market, is that the retail media players need to change and evolve, and I guess become more and more accountable, because as we provide more reporting, there's more expectation. So competition is actually a good thing for our brands, so they can test things in different networks. As they get more insights, they can go, well, this worked for launching a product, but it may not work for, something else, or just for a pure kind of tactical play. So things are evolving very quickly. So I think the biggest thing to pin it together, which is kind of going back to the previous conversations, is providing better access to data to compare and planning data, and then sort of, let the market kind of sort it out for itself, so to speak.
And Rog, how are you planning with all of the retail media networks that are emerging? I think there's probably a lens you could share from a local, but also a global as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are a lot of retail media networks, but then again, as a brand in the alcohol category, there aren't actually that many that sell alcohol. So within the ones that I care about, there are only a handful, and I'd probably appreciate a couple more, if anything. So I think when you see the scale of it all, I think you've got to pick and choose, and the strategic ones for us are obviously specific ones that sell alcohol, the intermediaries, the marketplaces, the specialists like Endeavour. So they're the key players for us, and that's how we would navigate it. And we heard earlier there's the expansion into commerce media as well now, which is great, because that gives you that multi-merchant view. So you have those behaviours built over multiple different merchants, a really rich way of identifying audiences, but perhaps don't go quite as deep on the SKU level reporting. So they're really complementary to the retail media networks that offer, really that closed loop reporting at a SKU level, which is so crucial.
And is there a level of the way that you're working with, I guess, direct retailers, but perhaps agencies in how you're planning and the ease to show up across a range of platforms, but through less friction points?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're definitely on a drive to improve automation in retail media, and that's one of the reasons why we're working closely with Flywheel in a number of markets, because they can pull in all of those APIs from the different retailers and have an analysis and a view across different networks. So it gives us a sort of apples to apples ability to compare there. On a broader, bigger scale, we're obviously doing things like triple M modeling and attribution modeling to have that view again across different channels and have a sort of that macro view that allows us to allocate budgets from quarter to quarter, month to month. And then programmatic's definitely like a key area for retail media. Offsite has always been programmatic, like 95%. I think what's more interesting is the on-site piece becoming programmatic now as well. So there's newer SSP solutions that retailers can deploy and bring in demand sources from multiple areas. So whichever platform that agency or brand is using, you can have that unified auction on the sponsored products and that on-site placement. So that's really interesting and obviously useful as it automates and makes things a lot more efficient.
I completely agree in terms of efficiency and trying to drive a frictionless world, but also bringing it back from off-site through to in-store environments to demonstrate, I guess, the measurement and outcomes that brands are looking to solve for. And I think you touched on a really nice point there around budgets and, the topic that we spoke to earlier today and how we're really sizing up the prize of retail media. And I guess be keen to understand, where is the revenue really coming from, Rog? Is it growing? Or are we finding new areas? Or are we borrowing from other areas?
Yeah, well, I guess budgets are moving around different channels, so we'll get to that point. But if you think about it, every start of every financial year is a clean slate. So you've then got programs that you might already need to invest in, some initiatives, programs that are ongoing. You might have multi-year agreements, they take some budget. But at the end of the day, at the start of that year, you're going to have a strategy and choices to make across all of the different areas. So for us, we want to make sure we have the right split between sort of scale and reach media, customer media, which is the retailer media in this case, and then there'll be some money towards creative development. And obviously that's not working media, so you want to reduce that as much as possible and have the sort of hard-working dollars, where they can reach customers and eyeballs. And then within retail media, we've also got a process around investing sufficiently. So having the right level of retail media investment that is essentially tied to your e-com or in-store penetration. So how much is that channel driving? And then how do we sort of invest ahead of that?
You heard it here, guys. It's a new financial year. Roger's got some budget for you all. To that point, I guess there's two parts to looking at sizing up the prize from a retail media perspective, Martin. I guess you could look at it from the perspective of building a business as well as, the revenue attributed, the monetization angle. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yes, I can. So firstly, if you're about to go into retail media and you're a retailer, be very careful and consider it very carefully because it is very expensive for for retailers to move into retail media. So there's a lot of capital investment to go in there. Obviously, you need great data sets, loyalty programs, and those things you can leverage. So that's the first point, and also the spread of categories. So a big retailer, Coles, Woolies, even Endeavour Group to a certain point, has a lot of categories where they can bring investment to drive incrementality. Now there's a second part, which is very topical, is kind of what Rog was saying, where the money's coming from. So from a retailer perspective, what you don't want to do is shift trade dollars from left to right, and you just spend obviously millions and millions of dollars of building retail media. So it is about driving incremental investment into the retailer. Our objective is obviously drive a sales outcome and a brand building outcome for the supplier. So there is a push to bring revenue into that. So we don't want to see trade dollars going from left to right. It doesn't do anything to the bottom line. That's the realities of it. For us, we look at our trade investment, we make sure it's in line with the expectations of our supplier partnerships and retail media's over and above that to drive incrementality. Where that comes from, that's the magic question. I'm glad to hear Roger's allocated a lot more revenue for us, which is thank you, Rog. But it is clearly coming from other media sources, whether it be traditional or other retail media players. So, you know, publishers 7, 9, 10, they compete every day for briefs. Retail media networks now have to compete with other retailers and also compete with the publishers in the market to a certain degree. And then you have partnerships where, you know, from the off-canvas space, they can drive, you know, build a brand in a off-canvas space, won't name players, and drive into the retailer. So you're building weird sort of or positive kind of sort of partnerships as well. But the data will set everyone free, basically.
Yeah, and I completely agree around the journey of growing the category outside of the brand's job to do for growing revenue and new to brand customers. And I think there's a really interesting way from the way we look at how we size up the prize of the economics and where it's planning. And John Harvey, is there anything you could probably share with us around the buying methods, maybe particularly more in the lens of an agency versus brand perspective?
Yes, I am going to try to be sensitive with my answer, but we'll see. So I think that, like, to me, the big difference with the way demand gets activated in retail media is you have a very specific group, and that is the brand's relationship with the retailer from a supplier perspective. Then you also have the agency side that's there to activate on behalf of the brand, you know, at a broader sort of level. I think, to me, what I would hate to see, and this is sort of, I think, a trend that programmatic went through, is that the buying activation from an agency perspective at times went to how few buttons can I hit versus how much reach can I get at this price. And I think it diluted a lot of the added value, a lot of solutions brought to market that were great for the end brand, but were sort of subjected to the buying methodologies that existed within agencies for good reason. Now that we have sort of this extra relationship that the brand already has with the retailer, I think both can coexist. I don't think one needs to replace the other. I don't know if there's ever going to be a world where, as a direct brand, let's say, as Diageo with Endeavour Group, I'm going to hand over all the spend I have right now through our trade marketing relationship over to my agency. I think there is a room for an exchange there. I think we're seeing this in the US. So I think a good example is in the US, we have a lot of our holdco partners working alongside the brand relationship from a supplier perspective with the retailer in the room to sort of say, what makes sense for each of us to own? Where can we be collaborating better together? What is experience and expertise we as an agency can bring to the table that fits really well alongside the brand relationship that you have directly with the retailer? So I think that particularly because the off-network piece is growing so significantly in the commerce media, retail media space, I think the activation of that off-site demand and the reach that these kind of off-network providers can bring from an audience reach perspective are really critical and important and can add a lot of value for the brands. So I think it's going to be a balance on how do we continue to drive what's that end value for the brands and the retailers, and how do we not let the transactional side of our industry sort of get in the way, which a lot of times it can do. And so I think it's always a balance as we kind of march towards that. But I think, to me, that's something interesting that retail commerce media is going through. And I think there's a lot of things we saw from the programmatic space that are starting to kind of eke their way into retail media.
And I think a key takeaway there is really the evolving nature of the business of retail media is around collaboration. And the more we partner together and work together to understand the ultimate goal will help produce the best outcomes as more entrants come into play, and the best effectiveness for those brands and retailers as well. I think that's a wrap for us. We may have gone over a little bit over time. Thank you, everyone. A big thank you to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.